There are some very common and normal reasons why many beginner violin students play out of tune. And I want to show all of them to you so you can kind of get a good idea of what most beginner students do wrong and how to do it right. So the number one reason why violin students sound out of tune when they first start playing is the fact that they're not holding their violin correctly. So what happens a lot of times is that we forget that we don't hold the violin with our hand, we hold the violin with our chin. So we place the violin underneath our chin and we hold it with our chin. And then our wrist needs to be nice and straight and sort of angled around to be ready to play. Now what most beginner students like to do is they like to have a pancake hand like this. So their wrist is crooked. Because the wrist is crooked like this, then it makes it very difficult for them to play in tune because their fingers are at an angle and they're angled in the wrong way so it doesn't sound right. So we need to focus all of our energy onto having a nice straight wrist. And that comes from, oddly enough, holding the violin with our chin. So if our violin is held correctly with our chin just like this, then we should be able to just gently swing our wrist up. We have a nice straight wrist here. Our fingers are curved around and we're ready to play. Now occasionally, not as often, but sometimes I get the over-eager student who wants to have a nice straight wrist and they go too far the opposite way. So instead of having it nice and straight like this, they pull their wrist this way and that also makes them sound out of tune. So the goal is if you had like a ball or something and you placed it in your hand, it should just be able to roll easily down your wrist and down your arm. If your wrist is crooked like this, obviously you can't do that. And if it's crooked like this, you can't do that either. The next thing is all about thumb placement. Now, there's a huge debate about this, and even the way that I play is not the way that I teach my students to play. But after teaching for 15 years, I think that I know where I would recommend most students putting their thumb. So what I tell my students to do is when you put your violin up and it's nice and straight, your thumb is going to go right in between these two finger tapes right there. The reason is it curves your wrist around so that you're perfectly able to have the right angle to play perfectly in tune. Now, a lot of teachers, they have different preferences, like putting their thumb back here, putting their thumb over here, and I've tried all those different ways, but it seems like the majority of students play the most in tune, learn faster, progress better when their thumb is in between the two finger tapes right here. And I think it's just because of the angle of the hand and the angle of the fingers. So I would recommend that you do that. The next thing, and this should be pretty obvious, but a lot of times students don't like to tune their instrument, especially when they're first starting. It can be a real challenge, but you need to tune your instrument multiple times a day. So for example, anytime you put your violin in a case or take it out of the case, you need to tune it to make sure that it's in tune. If you travel with it especially, go to classes, go to lessons, that type of a thing, make sure that your violin is in tune every time you take it out of the case. If you're in a long rehearsal, you need to double check your intonation several times during the rehearsal to make sure that you're in tune. Additionally, weather changes. For example, if it starts raining, my violin will automatically slide out of tune. So I really need to pay attention to humidity and weather and temperature changes. Also, anytime you're playing and you're just like, oh, I just don't sound very good, the first thing you should probably check is to make sure that your violin is out of tune, because that's something that you're going to have to do for the rest of your playing career. The next thing to think about is the fact that, I think American Idol taught us this, that sometimes we think in our head that we sound amazing, but as we're playing, we don't actually sound as in tune as we think we are. Each person is given a certain level of ability to distinguish tones and distinguish the different sounds. And some people have amazing talent in that regard, and some people have absolutely none. And as a teacher, I don't really care if you're completely tone deaf or you have perfect pitch, but what I think is really important is just the ability to understand when you're playing out of tune. So thank goodness for chromatic tuners. They're devices, you can buy them separately, or you can download as an app on your cell phone, and then you can check to make sure that you're in tune. Now me, I'm a professional violinist, but I still use a chromatic tuner to double check all of my tuning and make sure that some of my notes are in tune, because sometimes they're not, and sometimes I think they're in tune, and then I go back and I listen to a recording or something of me playing, and it's not always as perfect as I would want it to be. So chromatic tuner is a great way to really gauge and check to make sure that everything is in tune. The next thing to think about is if you're playing a piece and it just sounds terrible, maybe you're in tune, but maybe you're playing the wrong note. So sometimes that happens with beginner students. Their finger pattern is wrong, they're playing a high second finger when they need to play a low second finger, that type of a thing. So double check all your notes and make sure that you're playing the right notes. And then finally, a final thought about intonation is the fact that you're better off playing a wrong note perfectly in tune than a right note out of tune. So for example, if you're not sure if you're supposed to play a high second finger or a low second finger, make a decision. Don't put your finger in the middle and sort of be like, well, I wasn't sure, so I kind of played this middle note, because that means that you just played everything completely out of tune. Even if you play the wrong note, if it's beautiful and if it's in tune, chances are the audience is less likely to notice, but they will notice if you play a note and it is out of tune. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, go to my website, stringexpert.com. Love to hear from you. I'm also on Snapchat and Instagram and would love to talk to you there as well.